The views and opinions of the hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the position of the management and staff of Guardian Network. Good afternoon, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Guardian Radio AM. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to a wonderful conversation. Sorry, Mr. Producer, my guest is in the waiting room, if you would be so kind. And for whatever reason, I'm getting feedback. If you could deal with that, it's very good. Yeah. All right. So today on Guardian Radio AM, thank you very much, producer. That's perfect. Today on Guardian Radio AM, we have an incredibly exciting conversation. I'm very, very happy about it. One of the most important elements of shows like Guardian Radio AM is the ability to provide a platform for our listeners to both learn, opine, interact, and get information in order to make decisions that hopefully will reverberate throughout our society and wind up with a step forward for us collectively. And one of the things that I'm most excited about is the ability that we have here on Guardian Radio AM to really open up some important stories and have deep conversations about stories that have international impact and international stories that have an impact here in the Bahamas. And today we are going to look at something that has a very profound effect, both here within the Bahamas and also on the Bahamas as a leading member of the Caribbean nations and as a member of the international community. And so in the lead up to the 30th anniversary of the Bahamas' ratification of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, also known as CEDAW, the NGO Equality Bahamas is hosting a speaker series, and this upcoming speaker session will feature Gaynell Curry, who is a Bahamian human rights activist, an independent expert member of the United Nations Permanent Forum of People of African Descent, a policy hawk at the United Nations, someone that was also tapped to be the founding director of the Department of Gender and Family Affairs. And I believe I have spied her on the dance floor once or twice. And she's a very elegant and classy dancer. I would like to welcome to Guardian Radio AM, Gaynell Curry. Gaynell Curry, welcome.
Thank you so much, Quincy. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. So the convention, or CEDAW, it was adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1979. It's often described as sort of an international Bill of Rights for women. The convention describes discrimination against women as any distinction, exclusion, or restriction made on the basis of sex, which has the effect or purpose of impairing or nullifying the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise by women, irrespective of their marital status, on a basis of equality of men and women, of human rights, and fundamental freedoms in the political, economic, social, cultural, civil, or any other field. We live in a country where, in my other radio incarnation, I do a show that's centered firmly on politics. And let's just take politics as an example. Politics in the Bahamas is impossible without women. Women are the ones who are on the ground as the main campaigners. Women are the ones who organize the constituency associations. Women are the ones who organize the fundraisers to get people in a position to even get noticed in national politics. Women are the ones who organize the cookouts and the meet and greets, and women are the majority of the voters. So we could not have a real political discussion in the Bahamas in the absence of the influence of the Bahamian woman. When you look at religion, which is our other national, let's not call it a pastime, but that is also incredibly important to the Bahamas. Even prior to the 20th century's admission of women to the role of leadership in the church, you can't have a church without women, right? The women are the ones who are in all of the ministries. The women are the ones who are the outreach and evangelical arms of every ministry. The women are the prophets. The women are the servants of the pastor. The women are the ones who are praying for everybody. If the women picked up and walked out of the church would close down. So we live in a country where the influence, I won't even talk about education, right? We live in a country where the influence of women is so pervasive that we don't even think about it. It's beyond taken for granted. But we also live in a country where the other side of that equation is so unbalanced, it's not funny. Because women are discriminated against in the most pernicious and subtle of ways in politics, in the economy, in the culture, even in economic and educational pursuits. And so the importance of a convention like CEDAW, which characterizes violence against women as something bigger than physical violence, is, in my view, it can't be overstated. And so Gaynell is with us today to discuss some of the recommendations that CEDAW has made to the Bahamas, some of the things that maybe she'll talk about on June 18th when she speaks as part of the CEDAW Convention Speaker Series. But before we get into looking at any specific recommendations, I wanted to ask Gaynell, Ms. Curry, to respond to my opening salvo. What are your thoughts? Where am I wrong and what did I get right?
Actually, Quincy, I'm happy to say that you got it all right. It's such a pleasure to be on the show with you, Quincy, and to have someone who gets it, who understands the importance of international conventions, who understands the importance of the Bahamas' engagements globally, regionally, who understands that though we are islands, we're not islands unto ourselves. We must engage. And someone who understands that there are certain standards that we, as a part of the global community, must live by. And I think you definitely get it right when you describe the role of women in society. And I always go back to the famous saying, women hold up half the sky. That's really not just a saying. When you look around the Caribbean region, globally, there's also a challenge, but around the Caribbean region, women are really holding up quite a bit of that sky, oftentimes a little bit more than their fair share, more than the half. They're actually in large numbers, single parents, single mothers. They're in dominant numbers, large numbers in the educational system, in the healthcare system. They're running our community centers. They're in the back, holding up our political parties. As you mentioned, I always think about the women in the background frying comforters. More and more women are stepping forward, which is fantastic. But it's good when you can recognize that their role is important. And I think no role is insignificant. I think every role is important in the development of the country. We all have a part to play, and we just really need to recognize and appreciate the role that women play, as well as the role that men play and other minorities in society. We have to recognize that, appreciate that, bring it on. I wanted to add one more thought to your introductory comments, and that's around the Sustainable Development Goals. We have these 17 goals we talk about, we want to develop, and it's what we want to see our countries look like, the globe I'm speaking about. Where do we want to see our countries go by 2030, right? And in the Bahamas, we want to see women having a more prominent role. Goal 5 of those 17 Sustainable Development Goals specifically talks about gender equality and the mainstreaming of gender and the rights of women throughout the entire 17 goals. So whenever you're speaking about any of these goals, you're speaking about how that relates to men, women, boys, and girls in society. And where do we need to focus the attention to ensure that no one is left behind? And I bring up this as the SDGs because there's a synergy between the SDGs and human rights. When you implement the SDGs as a country, you're basically responding. And if you are, as a country, living up to your obligations in terms of human rights, you are invariably implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. Mm-hmm. So that's what I would add to what you said. So we need to think about, women's rights in the broader context of rights, because rights are interconnected. Right. So when we think about the rights of women are not an homogenous group. We're talking about different types of women in society that may intersect with various different rights. And how does that play out in terms of their role in society for development, their role in society in terms of political leadership, their role in society in terms of wealth and generation, in terms of productive rights and land rights and ownership and so forth. So there's so many things. It's not just one issue. When we talk about women's rights, we tend to get focused on the one issue, broad cross-section, and the intersectionality of rights and how that relates to different groups of women in society and how that ties into the overall development of this country. Where do we want to go? What are we developing for? Whom are we developing for? Not only for ourselves, right? For our youth, for the next generation, and so we want to make it even better for them. So that's what I will add to your introductory comments, Quincy. I hope that was helpful.
It certainly was. The Department of Statistics puts out news every time that they deal with the census. And the calculations for Census 2021, I believe, are still ongoing. But one of the things that I saw in their most recent sort of quick facts document was that from the mid-1970s to the present, more than 50% of all births in the Bahamas were to unwed mothers. And that females under the age of 20 are responsible for about 10% of the total births in the country.
Yeah.
And to me, those numbers are, I don't want to be alarmist, but the suggestion is that there's an issue that we need to be paying attention to. And when you look at some of the recommendations for things like constitutional and legislative reform, there's a lot there that has been recommended. And you can see in some places movement has occurred, but not necessarily to the extent that things have been concluded. So let's start first with who is it that is making these recommendations to the Bahamas that are contained in the document that you and I are talking about. Where are these recommendations coming from?
Yes. So the recommendations that we're speaking about right now are the recommendations coming out of the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. The Bahamas signed on to and you mentioned that the CEDAW Convention, that's a convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. And it was adopted in 1979, but entered into force in 1981. But the Bahamas ratified in 1993. And so that convention, which is the convention basically is an instrument, a legal document like a treaty that states come together and sign, ratify, and say, I agree to meet the obligations outlined in the convention. The conventions themselves are negotiated by states, so it's not something being imposed. And also, if you were not in the room at the time of the negotiations, there were countries that came into being after ratified. Say, for example, East Timor-Leste came into existence as a country after, or South Sudan after CEDAW entered into force. So you still are not, you have a chance as a state to look at that convention and say, do I want to be a part of it? So nobody's imposing anything on anyone. That's the first thing I want to say. It's a treaty that we agreed to sign on to as a country, and we agreed to sign on to in 1993. Now, the treaty itself outlines a whole series of, and you mentioned the definition already that comes directly from the treaty itself, from the convention in itself, and it outlines a number of articles or terms by which states agreed to work actively to implement. Yeah, so it looks at substantive equality. So it looks at how do we ensure that women and men, there is substantive equality between women and men and everyone within society. Substantive equality, really, we're talking about not just in law, but actually in fact, that men and women are equal before the law, have equal rights, to vote, to pass citizenship. Those are the that's when we talk about substantive equality. So this equality that actually means that men and women, we're not saying that men and women are the same, because obviously we're not. I'm not as strong as you, of course, but we have equal rights before the law, and we're made equally as human beings. So you're not better because you happen to be man, and I'm not less than because I happen to be woman. We are equal human beings at the time of our birth. And this convention talks about that, right? So the convention talks about substantive equality. It talks about non-discrimination. So all discriminatory practices and laws should be eliminated within society. And it talks about what we call as state obligations. The state is the country. So what is the Bahamas obligated to do? Right? So that's basically the essence of what the convention is talking about. It's talking about substantive equality, non-discrimination, and state obligations. A part of that convention also, they identify a body called the committee, or the CEDAW committee, that is to review the situation of states and to assess the extent to which they have taken steps to implement the convention, to bring about what I spoke about, substantive equality, to address those discriminatory laws and practices within their countries. And that state has actually taken the initiative, that is to put the institutions in place, the court system is in place and has sufficient funding, that there is processes by which people can make complaints, so forth. So the state itself has those obligations. So all of those are outlined there. And the committee has been set up under the convention. So the convention says there shall be a committee, and the committee will review states periodically. So the states are reviewed every 4 years to see what have they done to implement the terms of the convention. And I should start by saying that we're in good company. 189 states have ratified this convention. 189 states have said, I agree to be held bound. So that's it's very large. It's a high number of ratifications, but and there are a few countries that have said, I won't be bound, and for various reasons. The one that jumped out most to us, of course, is the United States. They have signed but not ratified, so they're not fully members. We have Iran, Somalia, Sudan, Togo, and I can't remember the other one. There's another one I'll remember at some point. But those are the countries that have not ratified and are not members. All of us, other states have said, I agree to be bound by the terms of this convention, to do what I need to do to ensure that the women in my jurisdiction, and it has nothing to do with the nationality of the persons in your jurisdiction, the women in your jurisdiction will have their rights respected, protected, promoted, and fulfilled based on the terms of the convention, and any obstacles thereto. The government will be saying, the government will take steps to remove those barriers that impede women from realizing fully their rights as guaranteed under convention. So the committee, in its review of where the Bahamas is, has issued concluding observations. That's what they refer to them as, concluding observations. So after they've discussed with the government of the day, they've met with successive governments for the Bahamas for sure. And I think our last meeting was in 2018, where the Bahamas went before the committee to discuss what they have done. The committee, at the end of that discussion, that dialogue with the Bahamas, came up with they concluded, these are the positive things that you've done as a country, and this is where you need to go further. So this is how we've concluded our discussion with the Bahamas. Mm-hmm. And as you just said, Quincy, the recommendations that we're speaking about are those specific recommendations that the committee concluded at the end of its discussion in 2018 with the Bahamas. And those, as you mentioned, are varied. I think they came up with a total of about 80 recommendations for the Bahamas, right?
Yeah, good number,
Yeah, and so quite a number, they're asking us to remove our reservation, for an example. We have a reservation. States can have reservations and say, I agree to this convention. I agree to accept all the articles of the convention, except, and in the case of Bahamas, we've said, except Article 2A and 9.2, right? So
Right.
those are the reservations that we have made. And so the committee has said, consider withdrawing those reservations. And that reservation, Article 2A, is really about equality between men and women in the Constitution. And, we've had two referenda on that. Both of them indicated that they did not want to change the Constitution. So that's the will of the Bahamian people. They didn't want to change it at that time. I'm really hoping that we will have another opportunity to consider this. I understand that legislation is being assessed with respect to Article 9, because that's another 9.2. That's another reservation that we have with respect to passing on nationality to children, right? The rights of Bahamian women to pass on their nationality on equal footing as men to their children. Yeah. And that was also a part of the last referendum, which did not receive the acceptance by Bahamian people. So I understand that there's current discussion, if I'm not mistaking him, and I don't want to misquote him, but I think I heard the Attorney General indicating that they're looking at ways in which they can introduce that through nationality legislation or nationality legislation, as opposed to looking at how we can change the Constitution. But that's precisely what the committee is asking. Think of ways that you can ensure that women have their rights on equal footing as men, so that I can pass my nationality on to my daughter without bars and reservations, and you can pass your nationality off to your daughter without bars and reservations. So the committee has come up with a long listing, as I said, about 80, and I just gave you the example. They talk about asking the Bahamas to remove reservation. They talk about strengthening the judicial system, and perhaps thinking about introducing specific courts that relate to domestic violence and violence against women. They talk about the national machinery, which will be the Department of Gender and Family Affairs, which really needs to be strengthened. And in terms of resources, and that's financial and human resources, to be able to introduce more programming to their work. And we had thought about we really had an idea to work with the department. We started one or two, but we were not able to complete all of them. But there are a number of other issues. It talks about stereotyping, there's perceptions, how do we perceive women in society, and the need for the government to do more to address negative stereotyping against women in society. And you hear it still on some talk shows. People call in and say some things, oh, she shouldn't be dressed like that, oh, she asks for it, all these kinds of stuff, or that, or even, they'll say, oh, that's just men, they're like that. We have to just, they don't mean anything by it. That's just them. But meanwhile, back at the farm, it's really about harassment, right? So they talk about gender-based violence as well.
So Gaynell, we're going to have to take a short break.
Okay.
When we come back, I would like to actually look at some of the specific recommendations that they've made.
Yes.
And I have a couple picked out that I'd like to chat with you about. And
Definitely.
If you have a couple that you want to look at in particular, we can also take today at 422-4796. That's 422-4796. We look forward to hearing from our listeners via text. And a little later on, maybe we'll open the phone lines as well to hear from our listeners in that regard. But stay with us, Gaynell. We'll take this short break and we'll be right back. Folks, you're listening to Guardian Radio AM. My name is Quincy Parker. My guest today, Gaynell Curry, and we'll be right back after this break.
A local paper in Grand Bahama is back every Tuesday as a section of the Nassau Guardian. Available at local stores, gas stations, pharmacies, Western Bakery, and Bellevue Gifts. Daily and, of course, on Tuesdays too. Want to reach your Grand Bahama audience? Then call Barefoot Martin 4578 or message them for ad rates via their Facebook page. Advertising opportunities now include classified ads too. Keep up with all the latest Grand Bahama news in the Guardian newspaper every Tuesday.
Preparing for a hurricane can make all the difference in safeguarding lives. By knowing what actions you should take to reduce the effects of hurricane disaster, get all the facts of the potential of having insurance, impact-resistant windows, home emergency power, surge protectors, essential supplies, plus so much more before the storm. After the storm, where to purchase building or cleaning supplies, races where, which auto shop to go to after driving through flooded streets and more. The Nassau Guardian's Hurricane Guide will help to make sure everyone knows what to do in the event a hurricane approaches. Take advantage of this double insertion opportunity plus 15 radio commercials. Contact us today at 302-2300 or your account executives. Will you be prepared?
This is Guardian Radio 96.9 FM, Nassau, Bahamas.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Guardian Radio AM. My name is Quincy Parker. It is my pleasure to be with you today. It is the 7th of June. Sweet Jesus. How in the world is it already the 7th of June? The year of our Lord 2022. It's crazy. Joining me today, Danielle Curry, human rights expert, lawyer of, wow, that feedback is driving me crazy. Comment if we can do something about that, please. But Danielle Curry is a human rights expert and lawyer. She's an independent expert member of the UN's Permanent Forum of People of African Descent. She is a gender policy chief advisor in the UN system. She's a superstar. And I'm very, very pleased to have her as a friend and also as a guest today. Your text messages, your 24796. To dive back in again now to the recommendations from the committee, one of the things that they mentioned was that the core obligations of states parties under Article 2, they're really pushing for the Bahamas to set a clear time frame for constitutional reform, supported by a comprehensive educational and awareness-raising campaign and the inclusive participation of civil society organizations to expand constitutional protection from discrimination under Article 26.1 to include at least the grounds of sex and gender. And also they want to ensure without delay that a comprehensive review of existing legislation is conducted, that a comprehensive definition of discrimination against women is put forward in line with the convention, and that the principle of gender equality is integrated into all national laws. I know that there was some movement on that particular element, but I'm not certain where it is, where we landed on that. The other one, the other two sort of preliminary findings is they push the government to, recommended that the government ensure the effective implementation of the prohibition of discrimination on the basis of sex and gender through appropriate enforcement mechanisms and sanctions, and also adopt an action plan that includes adequate resources a timeline, and measurable targets requiring authorities to implement relevant laws to prevent and eliminate all forms of de facto discrimination against women and girls, and in particular, and we're going to get calls about this, I know, in particular, women of Haitian descent, migrant and asylum-seeking women, women with disabilities, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender women, and women living in the Family Islands. And then after that, they go on to make more specific recommendations. Sorry, go ahead. The floor is open to you.
Yes, I mean, those are, but what I call this is the essence of the convention, right? Non-discrimination, and you talked about substantive equality. This is what we're bringing about. We need to have it in law and in practice. And when they talk about an action plan, they're talking about really concrete measures, steps to be taken, right? That's that to be taken. And really, before we even, I guess, or while we get there, we need to be thinking about the laws, and the laws are definitely inadequate. As reviewed by the committee, they've indicated that we need to do more to implement, to strengthen legislation, really, with respect to gender equality, to ensure that there's equality between men and women in society. And you spoke initially about what that means. I spoke initially about what that means in terms of either withdrawing our reservation, because our argument is that we have a reservation and we're not going to be implementing that, right? We're not going to be doing anything particularly with respect to the Constitution at this time until there's a decision by the Bahamian people. And that's the stated position, I would imagine, of the government, but that's what they would have said to the committee. But the committee is saying you have signed on to it, the essence of it, and you cannot object to the essence of the convention. The essence of the convention is equality between men and women, and yet as a state you're saying, well, I object for having men and women equal in law. So you're objecting to the essence of the convention, which is really challenging for me, and I imagine others who study this issue, to really understand. So you accept it, but you reject it at the same time, or you put a reservation to it, and that is what is challenging. It's requiring the state to look at its legislation and to see what has to happen to ensure equality. And one of the areas we know it doesn't exist is in the Constitution in terms of nationality laws. So that is clear. To understand what we're talking about, you need to be able to define it. So we're all talking about the same thing. How do we as a country define discrimination against women? What does that mean to us? We're not on the same page with that, right? And that to me ought to be one of the things that we clearly spell out. There are a number of other definitions that I think we need to be thinking about as well, because that means we're often talking at cross purposes. When I say that there's, a lot of these actions are based on discrimination against women. No, but I'm not discriminating against women is what the average person say, or the government is not discriminating against women. The fact that you have put certain impediments in place, as you defined earlier, the definition, Quincy, it's any distinction or exclusion or restriction that you would have made based on saying that men can do this but women can't.
Yeah.
Or women can do this and men can't. Those are the kinds of restrictions we're talking about. And so when the government would say we don't have any discrimination, that in and of itself, because you have a distinction between a man, is a discrimination based on the definition given. That's why the committee is saying to the government, tell us, define for us in your law, what do you mean by discrimination against women? Right, because then we have a crisis. Your definition is wrong, and you need or needs to be tweaked or need to be assessed. Right, may not be completely wrong, but does not meet the standards, the international standards, and the standards set out in the committee. So those are very clear things, which is what I said. I always say this: we have a blueprint on what we need to do, and that's the recommendations coming out of these committees. This committee has said it. These same recommendations, if you were to look at the recommendations coming out of the periodic review. The Human Rights Council does a universal periodic review of every country. And these same recommendations are there. And I would really encourage the government to look at all of these recommendations side by side and see where we are, to the extent to which we have actually implemented. I think the main issue with us as a country is we have not implemented a lot, or we've implemented to a certain extent, but not all the way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we need to think about that very, very seriously in terms of the law. To me, it starts with the law, and then you need to do more awareness raising. Perhaps the government should be saying to what they will be doing step by step and how they will resource it in real terms. So we have de facto, because it could be the law and nobody applies it, or just is ignored. It sits on the book. We're talking about what are you going to do to ensure that people actually can, in reality, realize these rights. And I know that there's a challenge when we identify groups of women. And I started off saying that women are not a homogenous group in this country. We are different groups of women. And the idea behind identifying these groups of women is that they are more likely to be the most marginalized and vulnerable of the groups of women in society, meaning their rights may be more likely, necessarily saying that they are more likely to be not be able to realize their rights. So Haitian women, or women of Haitian descent, may not have that kind of opportunity to realize, or may somehow feel that they are barrier. Whether that barrier is something is imposed, or just maybe something that is just a reality. For example, language, right? So there has to be steps taken by the government to address those barriers, remove them, to ensure that Haitian women in the country can realize their rights. And as I said before, it's not about citizenship, it's about everybody in the country. Every individual, every human being in the country. That's we're talking about the rights of the human beings here, and not the citizens. And so the same with migrants and asylum seekers, and we can think about some that come as domestic workers and may have their passports controlled by others, and this kind of thing. So this is also a limiting of their rights. Women with disabilities, they've talked about this, and I think Erin Brown has done such a tremendous job of raising the profile of women with disabilities and talking precisely about what needs to happen. And there's a lot more to be done. We have ratified the Convention on Persons with Disabilities. We have never reported it. And so and a part of that reporting is assessing where we are. Right? And this issue of LGBTI or lesbian, transsexual, and transgender women or intersex person, this is an issue we need to think about. And it's somehow muddied by all sorts of other issues, right? And the point is, these are individuals whose rights ought to be protected, respected, and fulfilled as every other human being in society. We're not asking for anything extra than what others have, but what we're saying is that their rights have to be fulfilled. And, we always say in the UN, that rights are not like pie. When you share it out, it's all gone. The more you share rights, the more robust of a society, the more equal society, the more integrated and society we can have to move forward in terms of developing in the way we want to go. So it's not going to be just limiting rights, but it's actually going to be expanding rights so that all the boats in the harbor rise.
Very much. Again, I don't know, Kermit, if that call is still, if there was a call. There was a caller, I think it were two callers that we missed, which is fine with me. That's fine with me. I'm curious to know what people would have to say about that. Kermit, you can just let me know if they call back. But the next, what I wanted to point out is the recommendation. We have like 10 minutes, maybe less than 10 minutes left. But the recommendations with respect to access to justice and also with respect to the national machinery for the advancement of women. I think those two are very important for us at this moment in our national development. The committee welcomes, I'm quoting from the document here, the committee welcomes the state parties' efforts in the provision of capacity building programs for the judiciary. However, It is concerned about the limited capacity of police and the courts to address complaints from women about gender-based violence in a gender-sensitive manner. Mm-hmm. The committee is also concerned that women in the state party, in particular those belonging to disadvantaged groups, are unaware of their rights under the convention and thus lack the information necessary to. I think that's an important distinction, especially to say, if you're a part of a disadvantaged group, you may not even know what your rights are. And if you don't know what they are, how can you claim it, right? And you talked a bit about, you kind of mentioned it in passing, someone who is in the country as a domestic, but their passport, work permit, visa, whatever else have you, are controlled by someone who's not them. That places them as an indentured servant in a way that it's very frightening.
Yes.
And they have zero power. And that is, if that's not discrimination, I'm not sure how you call that, other than, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And that's why I think it's so important to have these kinds of conversations, Quincy, and to also, what Equality Bahamas is doing is phenomenal. I think it's awesome that you raise awareness, and I encourage people to listen in to Equality Bahamas and the work that they're doing on this year, particularly in identifying the rights under the convention. And yes, I think there are remaining concerns with regard to the judicial system and the extent to which we need to be looking at enhancing how the system relates to women, right? And how issues, particularly when we think of violence against women, domestic violence, and those sorts of things, how are we responding? Is the judicial system adequate? Are the laws adequate? Are the sentencing structures adequate? I heard people on the radio today talking about, it's ludicrous this person get 2 years for raping someone, or whatever it was. I can't remember the exact number, but I know that it was something that people were really shocked that but that was the maximum that could be done by law. We need to be thinking about how we actually, what the law says with respect to sentencing, and how do we expand this to give the judiciary a little bit more flexibility in how it can address this concern. Also, the issue around marital rape, and that comes up in here as well. But I'll bring it in here because we're talking about the judiciary, and there's this discussion around should we be having a law with respect to that. And I understand that the Attorney General and others have been speaking about this, having the Attorney General's office and the Department of Gender and Family Affairs. I know they had a law review discussion on how do you address discriminatory laws along with UN Women recently, and looking at the extent to which we can introduce new legislation where the laws are limited in terms of how they apply to women. And again, we have to have definitions that are clear. Again, we have to have sentencing that meets the offense, and we have to remove barriers. We talk about we can have this, but then there's a limitation under which a woman can complain, or there's a time frame. Those are all barriers and limitations to women's rights. But this is what they're talking about when they're talking about strengthening the judicial system and the laws itself to ensure, and the courts, in terms of how we actually engage women, how can we respond. The issue around the police, there's been a lot of talk around issues since COVID, and COVID is a real eye-opener, and I'm so happy that we have the opportunity to discuss it, around violence against women in the country, and women and children for that matter. And the Bahamas, I've always been saying, many years ago, I discovered that we were in the top 10 for rape and violence against women. And when I first discovered, I was shocked. I was like, absolutely not. When I looked at the numbers, it is true. And we are in the top 10 in the world. And then in the region, I think number 1, or in the top 3 in any case. So we have a long way to go. And a part of that has to do with to do with how we interface with the police, the extent to which we feel the police is on our side as citizens. And I think the police has tried over the years, and I think that there's some work to be done. I know I've worked with them in raising awareness around gender-based violence, domestic violence, what we ought to be looking for when we respond. So I know there have been efforts. I'm sure there's a lot more work to be done there, but that has to happen, and you need the confidence. The society has to have the confidence of the police. For us to be able to remedy these challenges that we have, so we don't, have women calling and then changing their mind, and then the next thing you read in the paper is the person's been beaten to death or shot or run over by a car, whatever the case may be. And people say to me, "Is this a big issue?" I could think of about at least five, 6 women that I know within my sphere who have been beaten to death over the last 15, 20 years. So it's not so uncommon, and I haven't even been here that long. I mean, I've been in and out of the country, so I'm sure we all know someone or know of someone, several women who this has happened to. And the challenge here in the country, Quincy, is people always say to me, "What about the men?" And my answer is always, "What about the men?" Because I'm not opposed to addressing violence, gang violence, and violence that happen between men. But right now we're speaking about violence against women, and I would like to have that focus on violence against women and the specific violence that they face. We look in terms of numbers. Women are raped far more than men are. That's not to say that men are not. And just the sheer numbers should get us thinking, do we want to be in the top 10 in the world in terms of rape? And, a lot of this has awareness raising, as they mentioned here. They encouraged the government to do more to enhance awareness. That's a big part of that has to be the work of the national machinery, the work of the Department of Gender and Family Affairs. And we started a lot of that, but much more is needed. It's still surprising to me that many people in our society do not quite understand these issues. And I think that was a challenge for the last referendum. Understanding what we mean by sex, what we mean by gender, what we mean by discrimination against women, what we mean by gender-based violence, what we mean by domestic violence. Definitions are really, really needed. I think the good work has been done by the National Task Force on Gender-Based Violence, and I think that report needs to be picked up, and I think we need to do more to implement it alongside the recommendations coming out of CEDAW, alongside the recommendations that coming out of the Universal Periodic Review and other mechanisms that we are part of. I would love to see the government reporting on the rights of children. We have not reported for many, many years on a convention on the rights of children. And we know the situation of children is something that we need to focus our attention on in terms of violence against them, in terms of their rights. And we have a saying in this country that, children are to be seen and not heard, and the children are to be quiet, but they have rights and they are to be heard and they are to have their rights protected equally. I think making that happen is really about reporting, looking at the recommendations that we received 10, 15 years ago. I think it was that we actually last went, maybe 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. And what have we done? What have we not done? Is this still relevant? Should we throw it out? Should we review? What should we be doing next? Reporting, to me, the recommendations coming out of these bodies, they are a blueprint for us to follow, not to the T necessarily, but it gives us a good idea of where the challenges are. These are experts sitting around the table from different parts of the world who have had a chance to study not only the Bahamas, but many, many countries, and to see very easily where the challenges are and what we need to be focusing on. People say, "Oh, it's not for us, it doesn't work." I say, give it a chance. Just try it, implement. Let's say we're going to implement 10 of these recommendations of the 80 this year, and see what happens.
And see what
Just
happens.
try it. Yes, and see what happens, And so we may surprise ourselves and say, well, we implemented these recommendations and they don't work.
Yeah.
I don't think that would be the case. But we can say that, it's not relevant to us. We have not tried it, and I would love us to try to implement the vast body of recommendations and excellent work coming out of this body, coming out, as I mentioned, our own task force, which did phenomenal work, and other entities. The Special Rapporteur on Violence was here, Violence Against Women was here. She gave excellent recommendations. Look at them, and let's see what we can do.
Yeah, let's try them out and see what happens.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you very much, Gaynell. I appreciate your time and your expertise and your energy and your willingness to chat with us about this today. And look forward to hearing your address on TV. Take care.